Today we are talking about episode 605, Give Me Liberty, written by Barbara Stepansky and directed by Christine Eben Green. Barbara Stepansky, I think she just came to us last season and wrote The Company We Keep, which was 504, which I really liked last season. I'm Courtney Williams, and I produce Outlander behind the scenes, and I'm a book fan and a show fan, and I'm a discussion group fan, and excited to be here with the ladies to discuss this episode. Tonight I am drinking a big thing of spaghetti sauce jar water with ice.
Does it taste like spaghetti sauce?
Of course not. It's clean. I don't know why I love this. My son does too. I love how drinks taste in this. I don't know why.
My name is Carmen Schmidt. I write the Outlander Anatomy blog, and I've been part of this wonderful foursome now for about 2.5, 3 years, something like that. And I'm grateful to be part of this group. And I'm an Outlander fan. It doesn't matter to me whether it comes via the written form or via the visual form. I'm a dyed-in-the-wool fan of Outlander. I am drinking tonight a mimosa because here it's only 3:30 in the afternoon or shortly thereafter, and it's a little early to go with something a little harder. So I've got a tangerine juice mimosa.
It looks yummy.
It is.
I am Kathy Harmon. I'm a family medicine physician who really enjoys both the books and the show, and I enjoy them separately. I am also a contributor to Blacklanders Convos, and which led me to being here. So, which I enjoyed for years. Wow. Considering it was supposed to have been one episode and it ended up being 4 years, creating a sisterhood that I never would have anticipated. But I'm here and I am drinking because I have to continue packing for a trip tomorrow. I am drinking Crystal Light pink lemonade.
Yum. Antoinette is not with us in this moment. She may be jumping on, we're hoping. She had a work thing that came up at the last minute. My overall impression, I liked this episode. It was different. I feel like this one's more different than any of the other ones. Even more than 604, the Jungian backstory. I think that Barbara did a masterful job with this episode because it could have been, it's kind of one of those ones where it's the political stuff and you're not at the ridge and throwing in characters that we're not invested in. And sometimes that combination doesn't work. I thought it did work in this episode, and I enjoyed this episode a lot.
I had a similar feeling about this episode. I would rate it as being excellent. It's not, I don't think, my favorite one of the season, but it's up there very close, I feel. And I think she did a masterful job of creating a bridge for at least 7 different storylines that I counted in this episode. You know, and she moved through them rather seamlessly and put them together. Now, I know that she didn't do it alone, but I'm giving Barbara a good deal of credit for the basic writing that brought together all of these different stories and moved the story arc of the season forward a lot, in my opinion. Prior to this one, a lot of the storylines were very personal storylines between the characters, you know, what were happening in their lives. But this brought them into the political aspect of what was happening in North Carolina and beyond at that particular time, and the impact that was having on the lives of people there. And I just really enjoyed it. I enjoyed the history that she brought into it, and she did so quite accurately, I have to say, from what I've read. So I would give it a really high rating.
I enjoyed it. However, it was my least favorite of the episodes, but that's like saying it's an 11 out of 10 as opposed to a 15 or 20 out of 10. So it was still really good. So I actually enjoyed seeing some of the old characters and seeing and them bringing in some of the new story. Carmen, you're gonna make me have to go back and watch it again because I'm like, okay, I can think of 3 tie-ins. I'm like, where are the other 4? But I thought it was interesting how they did some things that was like, okay, now we know it's gonna happen, but I knew it wasn't gonna happen in this season. So I was like, oh man, but I enjoyed it. I really liked it. And there were some things that were very different in this episode from any of the other episodes of the season. And that's always good.
Carmen, why don't you just take us through those 7 things? Because I know that's what I want to know. I think that's what Catherine wants to know. And I'm guessing that's what everyone who's watching is going to want to know. So,
Okay, I just thought of an 8th, by the way. But
Oh wow.
I'm going to get my.
so the Sons of Liberty story,
Mhm,
Mhm.
right?
Yep.
The Bonnie Prince Charlie tie-in.
mhm,
Oh no, I'm sorry, I did have her on here. Malva's busy little bee activities on the ridge.
Mhm.
There's Roger and Bree. There's
Mm.
Roger and the McCullums.
Mm.
There's Lizzie and the twins. And then there is Wendigo Donner
mhm. Yes. Okay.
Okay.
or Wendigo. Not sure how
Wendigo.
you
Yeah, I
pronounce
think
it.
it's
Wendigo,
Wendigo.
yeah. Well, the other storyline that was brought in was the gold.
Yes.
True enough.
Yep.
Yeah.
That was one of the 3 I was
and-
talking about.
And Fergus in the print shop.
Yes.
Fergus and Marsley in the print shop. I
True
mean,
enough.
honestly, that many storylines could have been a fat mess, you know.
Mhm,
Oh wow.
And Bree and her water wheel.
mhm.
Her engineering skills.
Yeah. Yeah. So I remember thinking back in 504 that Barbara really did her homework, that she's definitely a book reader. She
Mhm.
really did her homework to and not just this book, but she's read the books. So she's weaving in things from the future and from the past and you
Mhm.
know, little Easter eggs.
Mhm.
So I really
Yes.
enjoyed this episode, particularly as a book reader and
Yeah.
from that standpoint.
She created an episode that mirrored how Diana writes, in that she drops these little gems. You're not really sure how it ties in, but you know it does somehow, and you know you're going to find out at some point, but you don't
Yeah,
quite
maybe
know
3
yet.
books
And
later.
and then when it happens, you're like, oh man, that was genius.
Yeah,
That's what she did.
exactly. Yeah.
Yes.
And you know, it's funny that we're doing this episode separately, because it really is kind of like these things happened and then they were never addressed again,
Mhm.
which is great. It's that
Yeah.
it ties back into let the audience be intelligent. You don't have to say,
Mhm.
and by the way, in the last episode, remember, let's have a
Mhm.
flashback to, you know, we don't need that. And
Or a voiceover
yeah,
to
Yeah.
tell us what's happening. Yeah.
yeah.
To explain it.
Okay, so let's jump into favorite scenes. Carmen.
My very favorite scene was Jamie's speech before the Sons of Liberty at close to the end, when he was talking about the freedoms of an individual and how, you know, you can't say you stand for something and then not actually stand for it. And that's what he was basically saying. Stop being hypocrites. If this is what you want to stand for, then do it for everybody, not just for yourselves,
Mhm.
because that's one of the things we see in
A
politics
lot.
today, in a lot, is that people want certain things for themselves, but they don't want anybody else to have it, or certain groups not to have it. And that's what I found so beautiful about his speech. And he did it impassionedly. I thought he really delivered it, you know, with some bite, like I would expect Jamie to do. And I thought it was a great scene. I really liked it. And he, you know, I was happy to see that they heard him, you know, and they had the decency to look a little bit askance and a little bit shameful that they had behaved in the way that they had and not given the printer the liberties that they were asking for themselves. So I thought that's my favorite part of the whole episode, although I have to say it was hard to choose because there were several other very good ones.
Do you think that just I mean, it definitely is going on today on both sides, in my opinion. Um, I
Yeah.
have the talks with members of my family all the time about not lumping everyone together. And that's on both sides.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, the sad part about it is that it causes people in the middle to be torn,
Mhm.
often toward one side or the other, when really they're much more centrist. I think there's far more of the nation that are centrist in their thinking and closer together than they are on the far fringes of stuff. Times when it's been really, really bad in our nation's history, and I keep
Mhm.
when my children get desperate, I keep telling them, we've been through this before. Just have confidence in our way of life that it'll work through. And I believe it will. It's going to may get more painful yet before we're
Mhm.
done, but
Yeah.
I am hopeful.
Well, when you consider that the young women of the Me Too movement, the young men and women of Black Lives Matter, the young people of the well, basically choice. I mean, choice. These are all people who are going to age up into who, you know, and
Yes.
and I think what it is, you saw people from the 60s who were very politically active become politicians, become the policymakers, and then so we swung that direction, and then we're swinging back, and now these young people are going to come back, and it's going to swing back again.
It always swings around the
Mhm.
center. That's the way nature is, actually.
Yeah.
Biology is that way, I know.
Yeah.
But but people get hurt in the meantime,
Yeah. They do.
and that is the sad part about it, is
Mhm.
that people do get damaged from
Yeah.
this. Though I was very young, McCarthyism was another time when people were, ostracized and kicked out and
Mhm.
marginalized and all sorts of things. So
Mhm. Based on very little information, next to nothing, just if they were
it,
different in any kind of way.
it's like somebody saying you're a witch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You
It's,
know,
It
in
was
the
a witch
past, that
hunt.
was
That's exactly
it's
what it was.
exactly the same as that.
Mhm.
that's all it took, was somebody saying, you're a communist. So
And
Mhm.
it's,
then they,
don't you think it's really motivated by fear? I mean,
yes,
all deep down
Fear.
is just fear
fear
of
and
the
ignorance. I
unknown.
think
Mhm.
ignorance plays a big role.
The marriage
Fear,
of fear and
control,
ignorance.
and money.
Yeah.
Yeah. Money.
If you ever want to know why something happens, look to see who makes money off of it, who benefits financially from a particular situation, and or who gets the most power. By making people fight amongst themselves, you can gather up power at the top, while everybody in the middle and below are fighting
Are
amongst
fighting.
themselves. And that's exactly what happened now. It was just, let me pit one group against another. Let me keep pitting people against everybody while I amass more money and amass more power. And if,
Power.
as I do it, if you say anything, it's going to be, well, it's them. They're the
Yeah.
ones.
Yeah.
Look over
Interesting.
there.
Yeah.
It's always look over there,
Mhm.
Yeah.
to people. And then they look, well, this person is over here
Mhm.
doing shady business.
Exactly.
So let's
Good.
go on. My favorite scene. So my favorite part of the episode, I feel
Mhm.
like Catherine this week, was the title cards with Gregoire singing. That just, I became so emotional, and I thought it was so wonderful because the whole Bonnie Prince Charlie story is very important to people in Scotland, many people in Scotland, especially Highlanders. So the fact that they decided to highlight that, they changed all the title cards, they changed the song. I thought that version of the song was gorgeous and so evocative, and also the visual images that went with that. That was probably my favorite part of the episode. It was so artistic. I really loved that.
The part I liked, my favorite scene, was the scene where she tells Jocasta she can help her with her eyesight. And then she was telling, gosh, why am I blanking on her name? The other woman,
Uh, Fiona,
Flora?
or I mean, Flora. Sorry.
Flora
Laura, yeah.
McDonald.
McDonald. That's right. That it could help her as well. And I liked the medicine around that. So that scene kind of really, the label and the off-label use of the medication. Well, no, that was both off-label. But and then following up with a scene of them sitting around basically getting high in a gazebo, which I thought was kind of funny.
Yeah.
But yeah, I liked that. That was my favorite scene.
That was my second one, was the ladies in the gazebo and the ladies club with Aunt Jocasta and her long pipe,
Mhm.
sitting there smoking
Getting
some hemp
zooted.
flowers. I thought that was a terrific scene. I also love the scene of Jamie when he's walking out of the inn and he stops to see the jar with bollocks in it. But what I noticed, and I don't know if other people did, is that as you're looking at the jar, and we can come to his cojones later under the medicine, because I have some things I want to say about him. But if you look to the left, our left of that jar, there is a jar with a dissected mouse or rat in it. But if you look beyond that to the next left jar, there is a sign on it that says, "The head of the monstrous noxious serpent that poisoned the king of men, it perished of its wounds forthwith."
No way.
That's what it says on the label.
Oh my
You
gosh.
go look at the picture and
Oh,
take a picture
blow
of
it
it
up.
and enlarge it. You'll see it. It's there.
So he didn't
Wow.
even notice his
He didn't notice his own reference, but it's there. It, remember, right to the
Mhm.
left of the jar with the nuts in it
Mhm.
is the mouse. And then the next left one
The
is
technical
the head
term.
of the serpent that killed the king, that struck the king of men.
Well, I really love that scene too. I love how Sam played it, how he,
Sort of
stops and
moonwalk
backs up,
back.
moonwalks, and then his eyebrows. My next favorite scene is Malva, the creepy Malva cutting off the Sin Eater's fingers scene. I love how that was shot. So Christiana, the director, did a great job with that and many others, but her again, it just was so disgusting.
Mhm.
But you couldn't look away, it's just watching her do that. And now in retrospect, that at the time we thought it was maybe to infect people, but I think that it was showing her desperation and that she was maybe getting more finger bones for another love potion or something. Is that what you guys think?
Yeah.
I was thinking
Both.
it could have been both. Yeah.
Jessica is so good, and just the feeling that got generated in that scene.
The girl is not well.
Yeah, exactly. This girl's messed up.
Yeah.
And the poor Sin Eater. Oh. And you know how bad it had to have smelled in there?
And
Anyway.
then Ian in another episode buries him. So that must have been really bad when Ian did his task. But
Mhm.
yeah, she had been in there before too, because some of his
Their
fingers were
were
missing.
already missing.
Mhm.
Yeah, and we can talk about that in the medical, actually. I had questions about that.
I liked the scene
When
they're walking along the river and they
Mhm.
were looking for a spot to put the water wheel,
Mhm.
and there was four of them. And the look on Malva's face when Marceline knew what it was. I mean, she almost like, how do you know this? It's like, wait a minute. I didn't think they didn't know. Obviously, they didn't know, but it's like, how did you know? It's almost, she panicked. It looked like she had this look of panic on her face. And I thought that was pretty, it did a couple things. It showed us Marceline's knowledge, breadth of knowledge, and how intelligent she is and how much she knows. But it also gave us a clue as to who really did it, because it wasn't convincing to me that it was Amy. Never
Yeah,
was.
but she jumped right on that.
She's the one that
Mhm.
threw that out to deflect. Look over
Yeah.
there.
So we're going on to what worked for you, Carmen.
Uh, well, you've already mentioned this, but the opening scene and the of Bonnie Prince Charlie complaining about the gowns and the corset. Poor man, he ought to have a baby. He can
You should have
carry and have a
fought.
baby.
You should have fought in Culloden.
Yeah,
How about
that's
that?
right. That would have helped too. But I thought that opening scene was very effective. I also agree with you. The opening credits were, that song was, the final note was so soaring. It just was one of the most beautiful things I've ever heard. It really was, and deeply moving. But I will go back and say that I thought the opening scene was really good and unexpected.
Mhm.
That's not how I expected this episode to open, but it was very clever because it sets the tone for what happens later with Flora there, and she gets to explain why she did it. And and then that whole scene, I thought that it was nice to see a red coat presented that was a gentleman for a change and not just a cad. We've seen an awfully lot of that in the episodes, and I thought that this was a nice reminder that there are decent soldiers out there, I'm sure.
I liked the handling of the Amy McCollum storyline. We were worried about that in the beginning, that I think maybe Richard pissed someone off in seasons 4 and 5, particularly 4. I mean, because he didn't have a very good costume. His character was I don't know.
Weak.
Not
But
nice.
It was very
yeah,
weak.
well, he just didn't get. It was like anything crappy that Roger could do, he did.
Mhm.
And now we're getting a different version of Roger. And when I heard that storyline was in, I was a little worried that it was going to be overdone, or an opportunity for drama or something like that. And it was just really handled very subtly, and I liked that. And nobody lost their head or acted like they didn't have Brianna madly jealous, or it was just really well done. And we got to see Roger come to the understanding of, oh right, this is the 18th century. I thought when Brianna told him, and this is what everybody else sees, a married man who's always at this woman's house, they don't say, oh, he's the minister. And then he got it, and then Malva helped him really get it. But I liked how they handled that storyline.
The parts that worked for me, again, this season, I really like the way they've handled Claire as a physician. I feel that they finally have gotten it. Before, it was just kind of, nobody would actually do that. No one would actually act that way. This time, it's like not only are they getting the major points of what it means to be a physician, but they're getting the subtle points as well, and some of the nuance, which they just hadn't done before. And I really like the fact that they're doing it now. And it's sort of like one of those things, if you know, you know, but if you don't, it doesn't add or subtract at all, but it does add a lot for anyone who's experienced it. Um, the way that flows through, but also what works for me are the nonverbal cues throughout. A lot of the reactions were not verbal reactions, which I really enjoy, because it means that they're allowing us to enjoy the story without it being spoon fed. And there were a lot of times when a line was said to someone else, and it was someone outside of the exchange that reacted. And I like when that happens, because you catch those every time you watch it, you pick those up more and more and more. And so it kind of gives you something new each time. And so I really enjoyed that. But really what worked for me also was, again, like what Carmen said, there's just so many different components, but they were just woven in really well. And I don't know if the reason we enjoyed that so much is because we have read the books and we got it. We knew what was coming. So I don't know if non-book readers would have gotten the same experience, but I still think it was done very well, and it worked really well for me.
So I like the join or die snake. That is the actual flag that the Sons of Liberty used. They were very accurate about that. And if you notice, there's only 8 segments to that snake, because some of the areas, like the letter, you'll see the letters NE on there if you look carefully, that stands for New England, but it encompassed 4 of the colonies in that one. And then that happened in one other area with Pennsylvania and Delaware were combined into one. And then Georgia was not included on it because they didn't think it was at the time well enough organized to be part of this snake. But it's my understanding, if I remember correctly, I believe it was Benjamin Franklin as the first one that came up with that snake. He was quite a guy.
Yeah.
He's one of my
and
favorite guys in history. He
was a genius in my opinion.
was.
He was a polymath.
But
but
not only that, he was socially cool. You know what I mean? Like a
Yes.
lot of geniuses, you wouldn't really want to hang out with them, but
Oh no, he was talented, gifted, I would say, in his ability to communicate with people.
and
And
interesting.
he seemed to value people, which a lot of, sometimes intellectuals can be quite remote and don't really, make connection. But I felt like from what I read of him, he did. Not so
Yeah.
much with his wife, but he did with a lot of other
Everybody
people.
else.
Yeah, everybody else. But anyway, that's the correct flag, and I really like them having shown that as part of this tale, and weaving in the Sons of Liberty story into this episode.
But Carmen, have you seen the pictures of the Liberty snake in the shape of fallopian tube ovaries, fallopian tubes, and the uterus?
I have not.
Yeah,
I have not, but I'd like to see.
They recreated that, but in the shape of
Give me,
yeah.
yes.
It was very interesting. I was like,
give me
interesting.
liberty.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or die.
I agree.
I kind of alluded to it before, but the way that they, and I keep going back to that episode in season 5, I think it was, I can't remember the number, but where they brought in that guy, Graham, whoever, and he was just part of the whole story. The whole episode centered around him and going back to him and Claire. And I was left feeling like I don't care about him. And I feel like I just wasted a lot of time. I was worried that I might feel that way about Flora McDonald, her involvement in this episode. And I didn't feel that way at all. In fact, I was really interested. I thought the actress, whose name I didn't look up, did I need to do that?
It is Shauna McDonald.
Shauna McDonald. Oh, she's a McDonald. That's so great.
Yeah.
I thought she did a fabulous job. I really enjoyed her in that scene with Andrew Gower in the beginning, and just throughout, I thought she did a great job, and I was interested in her, and all the other characters that they brought in. I was interested in Mary, and I was so happy to see Jocasta, and I was even interested in Duncan Innes, and Lord John Grey does such a good job of, David Barry does such a good job of holding his place in the 18th century. He does not ever seem modern, as some people can do, in my opinion. Yeah, and those are all the ones. So I really enjoyed having those characters brought back in because it was done skillfully.
Did you know that this year is her 300th year anniversary of her birth?
Of Flora McDonald?
Of Flora.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, she was born 300 years ago. In this year, they do not know her birth date. They know her death date, but they don't know they know the year she was born, but not the day and month. I liked the Tom and Roger and Alan tugging that bell up the hill toward the church. And Tom says he's such an Eeyore. So he says, ask not for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee. And it's quoted variously, but it's one of John Donne's writings. When he was ill and he thought he was dying, he wrote those words. But that's the second time that I remember in the episode that John Donne has been quoted, because remember when Claire and Ed Gowan are standing on the shores of that loch looking out and they start speaking together? That's a John Donne poem that they recite. And I think he must be admired by this group of writers, because here he is come again. And I just thought that was it had a bit of of humor in it. When Alan says, my dad he's not really into happiness or something like that. It's like, not really, he's not. But I thought I liked that. I liked that quote, and I liked the setting in which it was done. And we can talk about what happened in the church later.
Is that under medical?
Could be. Yeah. Well, because I thought about a couple things when that happened.
Yeah.
I think the last thing that I noted was, and I forgot to write down the name of the song, but what he's whistling in the jail is from the bridge over River Kwai.
Yes. Academy Award winner.
Yeah. And so I just did a little bit of reading about it, and it was written in 1914, and it was called the March of
Colonel Bogey March.
Oh, okay. Thank you. So I went and I looked at a little clip of that movie, and they start whistling. I don't know if you guys have seen it or you remember it, but they start whistling, and as they're marching, and it's this pretty long scene, but then it goes into the full musical playing of it. And they did that at the end of the episode. I don't know if you guys noticed that. Exactly the same as they did in the movie. And I don't know, I liked the use of that. I thought that was super creative to do that and have her hear that. And then it was almost like, normally you wouldn't buy that Claire would be like, oh, I heard that. And then no, I didn't. But she's got so much crap going on, and she's just done ether. She probably doesn't totally trust herself, so it could happen. I liked the use of that.
In the book, the song that is whistled is the Yellow Submarine from the Beatles.
Yeah.
And this goes back earlier, and I wondered why they did that. And I think it was probably budgetary.
Yeah.
Because if they tried to get the Beatles song, they probably would have to pay a lot more money for it than the theme from the bridge over the River Kwai.
Didn't that happen in River Run?
It happened in
it was
another
at the house.
Place.
At the house.
I think it was at River Run. Yeah.
Because he was walking along the patio.
Oh, you mean
whistling.
where
she first heard them
in the
whistling.
book. In the book.
And Bree Harrison.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
The Yellow Submarine. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, the other thing I'll mention is that again, I liked how they brought in the different storylines, like the gold. I mean, the gold was handled in that one little section with Mary and Jocasta and Jamie, and I thought it was skillfully done, just dropped in there. But it's like, okay, check.
Yeah.
And it took us back. Remember, I don't remember which episode it was, but when she is leaving with her husband, the first Cameron, and her Morna, I think her name was, and he accidentally shoots her. But that's the first reference to the French gold. And now it's being brought back to our memory banks, out of our memory banks and forward.
Yeah, and they wove in the Murtaugh piece really well. Like in the gazebo, she says, until Murtaugh, and then that's it. Just the rest doesn't have to be said. And Claire says, I understand. But Mary says, do you think worry that she's losing her mind? And Jamie can connect all these dots and say, nope, no. Although he doesn't know anything about the French gold Does he?
I'm sure he's heard about it, and he knows it was divided up amongst different different people, and I think he knew that one of them was his uncle, didn't he?
Not in the show.
Not in the show. No, no, no. In the books. Mhm.
You know, I wanted to say that I actually did like that scene between Roger and Bree when Bree tells him that she's pregnant. I thought it was cute.
That was one of my favorite scenes.
Mine too. Mine too.
I actually cried.
Yeah, I thought it was
It was
genuine
really tender and
Mhm.
sweet.
and her little face, her little eyes, her excitement, and then their kiss and their, you know, and just the way they even had it all, the aesthetics of the shot of them sitting on their porch, and
Mhm.
I really liked that scene a lot.
I did too. It was one of the I've been waiting to tell you ladies, because you know I always say they don't work together. They don't work together. This time that worked for me. That scene really was just genuine, and it was sweet, and you know she's not the Brie of the books. I think I've come to accept that, which
Yeah.
helps a lot to let
Yes.
that go.
Mhm.
But I just thought that they did that very well. And Roger, she said, you know, it was never you that that I was worried about. And he said, I know. And then he said, I know. You know, like he
Yeah.
was realizing that, wow, she didn't ever worry about him. And then he
Mhm.
said, I'm sorry. And the way he said that was so genuinely
Mhm.
touching. He just said, I'm sorry.
Yeah, and he said,
You
I'm
know?
sorry anyway. Like,
Yeah.
I'm sorry anyway. Like, I know,
Mhm.
of course, yeah, I'm not going to cheat on you, but just I'm sorry for the whole thing. And
Mhm.
then the way she opened up after that, it was just it was really well done and
Yeah.
sweet. And you know, I I'm glad you said that about the Brie of the books, Carmen, because there's a real with the Brie character, with the way Sophie plays her, there's a real, and maybe it's who Sophie is, there's a real holding of herself. So there's a real restraint um that I think sometimes comes out in the face and the voice and the mouth. But I think it's just either who she is or how she's playing that character,
Mhm.
which I think is part of the issue because it's so different than the Brie in the books, is part of why it was hard for us to accept it. But I think I'm starting to.
Yeah.
And that scene,
This season has helped
yes,
me.
yeah, and that scene in particular was just great,
Yeah, I agree.
and I wanted to make sure we called that out today. And I also wanted to call out the little scene between Brie and Marsley, where Marsley realizes that Brie is pregnant. Lauren, she's so good.
Mhm.
She slows down every scene that she's in. You know, there's just, she just takes it, and you don't at all feel like this is too long. It's just like she takes it and she puts in these pauses and these
Mhm.
looks and she just adds so much.
Do you remember hearing Jamie address her as Fiona Gall?
Yeah.
Gal. That's Gallic for Fiona.
Mm.
I didn't know whether it was her name or if it was endearment or what it meant, but I looked it up and it's Gallic for Fiona.
So I'm
I
not
can't
crazy. That's why I called her Fiona.
pronounce. Okay, my least favorite scene, and I'm sorry, Kathy, was the Four Lasses by the River. And I have to say, it I think that I listened to the podcast back a few weeks ago when we were first going to do this. And they said that where they were going to originally do that scene was flooded out by rains. And so they had to switched to a new spot along the riverbank, and I guess it kind of messed things up from the perspective of filming and the actors where they thought they were going to be, and everything. So it just seemed to me that the timing was a little bit off. I love the expressions on Malva's face because she was terrific in that scene, as all of her scenes. She knew exactly who placed that venom charm there, and I thought that was terrific. But what I thought really didn't work very well is I didn't think that Lizzie was terribly convincing, as all of a sudden coming on with a fever. Bree had just said, let's go up a little further and see what else is up there, meaning they had come from below, presumably, right? When the two ladies took a hold of her and were helping her walk away, they walk on up where they'd just come from below. Why didn't they turn around and go back from where they came from? If they'd come from above, then they would have known what was upstream. I mean, this is like that first episode when I'm telling you that Claire turns back and forth about 3 times in that episode.
And Roger in 412.
Oh, that's right. Roger also in 412. So anyway, that was my least favorite scene. It wasn't that bad, honestly. So I had to search because I couldn't think of anything else that I had that I could honestly say I wasn't real happy with.
That was my least favorite scene too. There were just certain pieces of it that didn't feel convincing to me. The way the lines were said, and just certain parts of, Lizzie fainting and then Marcelly checking her fever with her finger bone ash hands. And I don't know. It just, that whole scene didn't gel for me. Yeah.
I mean, I can see that. I mean, because the parts that I liked about it had nothing to do with Bree or Lizzie. It was Melva and Marcy. So I can definitely see that. My least favorite, interestingly enough, even though I was happy to see him and he's definitely good to look at, were the ones with Lord John Grey. I was like, where did you come from?
What are you doing
there was
there?
no explanations. Like, where, how did you just happen to be there? One, it's like, what happened to Ulysses? Didn't he go with you? And you're like, it's like, we just forgot about him. And then, it's like,
good point. That's a really good point.
I just didn't understand. And maybe it's a setup for something else later for to show that there's some, maybe some underlying conflict between him and Jamie, although he was just still enamored. It was very obvious, but I just couldn't see his point.
I think it's what you said. It's to set up everything that's coming.
Yeah. And
to show that that subtlety that you talked about with the lack of lines when they would show, because Lord John is like, it's an ideal time and it's so important. And he's watching Jamie's reaction. He's going, oh shit.
Yeah.
It is true. And I think it was for us to see that happen and then to lay the groundwork for what comes later. But I kind of agree with you. I felt like those scenes were a little flat.
Yeah, they seem disjointed for some reason. There was no flow to them, even though I like seeing him. He's a fantastic actor. He does the part well, but I just didn't feel like if they weren't there, it wouldn't have been a big deal.
So my other least favorite scenes, and it's just me, was all of the Sons of Liberty scenes. Because I just that I struggle with those parts in the book too. You
need to go to North Carolina and visit some of the sites and you might feel differently.
Okay.
It changed it for me. It did.
Probably because it's more relevant, right? Yeah.
Feels more real.
Okay. Was there anything that didn't work for you, Carmen?
Yes. I thought Roger posing to see Jamie McCullen with his leg out, like a centerfold on Playgirl was really cheesy. The man has a decent voice, I have to agree, but for him to stop working and then to kind of put his arm back and raise his head. This was obviously done for the audience. I understand that, but I just can't see him doing that at that time. It was just out of place in my thinking.
Kind of like
I-
Outlander, the musical took over.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I didn't really care for that. I want to know why there were so many men's shirts hanging from Amy's line. Or clotheslines.
Well, is that her? Maybe that's her
She's a
profession. She
hoe.
washes clothes.
I thought about that. It could
Maybe
be
she
she's a
washes
hoe.
clothes. Maybe she just washes clothes. Like that's her way of
I-
making money. She's a
I
laundress.
thought about that might be the case, but she does have men's shirts hanging on her line.
So she's a laundress. That's all.
Sure. There you go. Well, the Joe and Kezzy scene where they're at Bree's cabin
Mhm.
and she tells them to go get gallberries. Do they know where they are? And they say, oh yeah, they're up the mountain. Well, they actually grow in coastal areas of North Carolina. They don't grow up on the mountain. Now in the book, it was the Cherokees that she got the gallberries from. But I just wanted to say that because he said it in a way that sounded like, oh yeah, they're growing up there and we can just go up and get them, no problem. I thought that Lizzie suddenly relapsing from malaria after 3 seasons. We haven't heard zip about it basically, and then suddenly she has recurring fevers. That was a little bit of a stretch, I thought.
Mhm. It was
Yeah,
set
I
up.
it was,
thought
it was
for the
very,
setup.
very much like Claire's Catholicism last season.
Convenient.
that's true. That's true.
Where it's like she's never ever shown any religious thing, and then all of a sudden it's like,
I'm a Catholic. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
some of these little threads don't get pulled through.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that Lord John Gray holding that mop against
What?
When he had the mop, he was like,
Yes, the
Against-
mop looks like it.
like that would stop anyone.
That's going to stop a gang of guys or a broom. It was either a mop or a broom, but he was just so serious, like he had a Gatling gun in his hand or something.
Didn't you hear them? They were like, "Stop! He's got a mop."
Or was it the
Watch
one with
out.
the tire on the end? Maybe that was it.
Well, I think it did have hot tar
Hot
on
tire.
the
So
end
maybe
of
it was
but
just
I
the
mean,
hot
it
tire. Nobody wanted to get the hot tire on them.
could
So-
be. It just didn't
Okay.
look very convincing of a threat, I have to tell you. Would Lord John Gray and Jamie really discuss treason in the street? I wasn't convinced that was, part of their discussion was, as Kathy mentioned, they wandered off at the reception and found a quiet place to talk. But on the street with people possibly passing by, I thought that was not a very wise place to be discussing
Discussing.
potential treason.
Well, and there were two guys right down the way,
there were two
not
guys
that far
standing
out
not
of
that far away.
earshot. Yeah.
Mm.
The last one is that I did not feel that Mary would have been that outspoken in those days. I think, when she says it was for a good cause, which it was, and, she had it, I'm sure she was correct about that. But I
Mhm.
think that would not have been
Mm.
allowed, would it? Do you think
No.
so?
One of the things that has always bothered me about Outlander is that they treat slavery like they're servants.
Yes.
And it's not. It was a brutal institution.
Yes, it was.
It was demeaning, it was dehumanizing, and they always treat them as if they're members of the family or, trusted members of the family or trusted servants. And, that's just not wasn't the case. And in fact, even her being in that room would have been unlikely.
Yep.
The only realistic part of it was when Claire spoke to her and Jocasta had this look on her face like, why are you talking to her like that?
Yes.
Like, why are you giving her
Jocasta
any...
did not like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
She
that's
didn't like her.
that was the only indication that she was considered lesser than. But other than that, It's like, it's still, even the fact of her running up to, you know, Lord John Grey and Jamie to tell them what something had, she wouldn't have excused, she would have stood there and waited for someone to address her.
Yeah.
She would not have interrupted a conversation.
Right.
But that's something that bothered me with every single episode where they show slaves in Outlander. They just never really, other than the one time where they, you know, hung the one young man, they really just did not address the brutality and the reality of, you know, we had a love interest, we had this, we had that, but nothing that really showed the real subservience of the slaves.
Well, let's go to things I noticed. Carmen.
Do you really believe that Roger would send Obadiah Henderson to work on Amy's house after he saw him and Malva in the church, going at it in the church? It came after then. I checked on it to make sure that it didn't happen before, but it came after. And I thought, that doesn't seem like what Roger would do. You know, he wouldn't send a guy like Obadiah over there.
Or
to a
maybe he
widow's
sent him
house.
because he thought he needed a wife and she needed a husband.
She
Because
does
I think
need a
that came
husband.
up at some point in the episode.
It does. Yes,
Yeah.
it does.
So maybe that's why it was
Could be.
it's to put them together so they can get married.
Yeah, I
I
mean,
also-
he's not painted as the really jerky character that he was in the book and in the show. In my opinion, he's not.
Until later.
Yeah. So maybe not.
I just felt bad for Duncan Ennis. He is just an ornament on Jocasta's arm. And you know, that's a flip side, because that's the way women have been for centuries on the arms of men. They're just an ornament and not a person in their own right. And he kind of plays that role in for her. And I have compassion for the guy. I actually feel sorry for him. He's almost, nobody pays much attention to him, and is all she does is when she's ready to go is say, I need refreshments, or I need this or something, and he escorts her away.
Because he has virtually no speaking parts. I did kind of rewind and watch. He does a lot with his face, that guy. The guy who's playing Duncan in this. He's very, very effective. Like when when Flora McDonald says, you know, oh, well, you're famous for your surgery. He has a very disapproving look on his face, like, oh, this woman. and you know, several different, you know, like, you were robbed. You know, he does a lot with his face because he has no speaking lines. And
Not really.
yeah, and Duncan Ennis was in the book, as we know, was also not an ornament, but a, you know, like a chess piece that she needed.
Yes.
So yeah.
And
I think
that would be the case here too. She needed a man to sign her documents and protect her
Yeah.
from other men trying to get at her property. So yeah.
Let's see. So I noticed that Bonnie Prince Charlie and Flora were escaping in June of 1746. Okay, so it was April 16th, 1746 was Culloden.
Yes.
So this is May, June, 2 months later. So he's presumably been hidden somewhere. Yeah. I noticed that the Bonnie Prince is still a major wimp.
Yeah.
I did notice the join or die flag with the snake. And I wondered about the symbolism of the snake. But I didn't look it up. And I saw that it was New England, New York, New Jersey. Is it Pennsylvania, Vermont, North Carolina, South Carolina, and what was M?
Rhode Island, Massachusetts,
Oh, I didn't see Rhode
Connecticut,
Island.
no, Hampshire. Those formed the NE, the Northeast.
Oh, okay.
Or New England, pardon me, not Northeast, New England.
And what was the
And-
M?
It was Maryland, I believe. It
Oh,
was by itself.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, Maryland is
Yeah.
what that stood for.
So those are the the states that were already part of the movement, I'm guessing. Yeah.
Colonies. Mhm.
The colonies at that point.
But you remember, don't tread on me. That was a
Yes.
snake. And I think that that's probably partly why they used the snake, because it was a threatening symbol.
Okay. In the books, when they stay at inns, there's generally like, you know, something to wash with and a stand and then a bed, and then it often has lice. They definitely are staying in nicer places nowadays. That was a nice room. Like that
Yeah.
was a really nice room. I noticed again, Roger's voice was totally healed. I noticed that Marsley starts moving her fingers before she says their finger bones. Let's see. I noticed that the musicians were socially distant at the party.
Mhm. What was that?
I noticed Jocasta looked younger in this episode than she did last season.
Yes.
Did you guys notice Lord John's look? You know, when he's standing there kind of posed when they walk in and he's looking over at Jamie, you know, he always has this unguarded look when he sees Jamie before Jamie sees him. And I noticed that.
Yeah.
Look of love.
Yep.
Of course, I noticed the walls now, and the reason is, I couldn't tell if they were painted or if it was a wood grain stain. It was like this rich red color.
At the
And it was
end.
hard in the inn, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the room and in the tavern part.
Yeah.
It was just beautiful, but I couldn't tell what it was. If it was like painted, then a stain over it, which is I know they use quite a bit. But it was just, or if it was like an old wood that they then, you know, it was natural. It was like a natural red wood of some type, but it was beautiful. Oh
It
gosh,
was.
it was in New Bern and in Wilmington, the sets, they really go all out when it comes to the sets in those places. Just beautiful, beautiful. And interesting enough, I don't remember what it was like in the house. Maybe it was wallpaper, because I tend not to
in the
notice if
big
it's
blue house.
Yeah, I tend not to notice if it's wallpaper. I notice if it's a solid color, unless it's
Yeah,
that
let's
ugly
see.
wallpaper that's in the
Their
boudoir.
bedroom.
I
yeah.
That
didn't,
that
I didn't
bedroom one.
notice either.
I
Yeah,
didn't either. I didn't either.
I'll have to go back and look.
Apparently that
Um,
was a facade. That was not a real house. That was a facade they built, and
Mhm.
the rooms inside were on set.
On set. I didn't know that. Lord, I noticed Lord John Gray's description of William sounds a lot like Jamie. He's tall and he's a historian and he's good at languages and he's
Chess.
great at chess, and I think he said something about sports or something, military or I thought the McDonald's looked alike. I thought that was a clever scene because, you know, they say, but from a different family and they're in profile and their noses match.
She also looks a lot like the painting of Flora McDonald. She
I wonder if
really
she's-
does.
Well, I wonder if she's descended from her.
Probably.
Let's see. I noticed the horses at Roger and Breeze in the background when they're talking about Amy McCollum, and it's that little brimstone. It looks like that same little bay. And then that black Frisian. And I was like, why are they just standing there? And then I saw there was this little subtle line that goes across that I think they probably are, you know, hooked to. Anyway.
Is this the first time he comes back when she's doing pipes?
Yeah.
When she's firing the pipes?
Yes.
I
And
have
they're
to go back and look
talking and
at
they're
that. I
showing
missed
the
them.
horses in the background. Yeah.
I missed him.
I noticed that Jamie looked damn hot in the tar cleaning scene. And I think it's because, well, he had on this beautiful green color vest. And then he had a looser wig on. Maybe it was his action wig. I don't know, but it just, he looked very handsome in that scene. And I noticed the CGI on little Henry Christian in this one. when they show him in the little basket. That's the first time I've seen that.
One other thing I noticed though
Mhm.
is how after all these seasons, everyone melts away in their character. And when you mentioned that scene with Claire wiping the tar off of his neck, I watched that and I was like, you just don't see Sam at all. I was actually I was like, I've been in the same room with him. I'm trying to find out where he is, and he just isn't there. He's just not there.
It's quite remarkable.
It is.
Yeah,
It really is. And I've only met very few of the actors. And so, and so it's more pronounced with them because I actually know what they move like in real life. And Rick, you don't see him at all in Roger. Even with, well, also that beard kind of helps, but definitely not with Ian at all. Definitely not with Sam. I mean, it's remarkable to me because I actually looked for it and I couldn't find it. But he did look very good in that scene. Well, the medical, I mean, I really like the way that they are portraying Claire as a caregiver and a healthcare deliverer. I mean, it's just really realistic finally. The way that some of the things are portrayed, like Lizzie going into malaria. I've actually seen people go into malaria. 3 of my family members actually have malaria, and that's just not how it works. Usually it's like,
is that from Kenya, Catherine?
mhm,
Yeah.
I don't, I'm protected because I have a sickle cell trait, but others in my family who don't have the trait did get malaria.
Will you explain that real quick? How that protects you from malaria?
From malaria, okay, so malaria is a plasmodium that is circular.
Yeah.
And it infects the red blood cells, which are also circular. And so they just kind of fit perfectly in, and they reproduce, and then they burst. And that's what kind of, they reproduce, and then they reproduce to the point where the red blood cell bursts. And that's what creates the symptoms, the fever, the chills, the anemia that occurs also.
There's a synchronicity to it too, isn't there, Kathy? Where there's
Pardon?
bursting occurring. There's a synchronicity to the bursting.
Yeah,
of the
it all
red
happens
blood
at
cells.
once.
Mhm.
Yeah. And so it's just like, which is really what usually kills people. If it kills someone, it's because they just lose all their blood internally. Their eyes turn yellow, you get jaundice, you get, all sorts of issues start to happen. Urine turns orange. It's just really, really dramatic. What happens in sickle cell trait or sickle cell disease is your red blood cells are sickle shaped, so they can't infect them.
Yeah.
And
So it's
harder for them.
literally like a physical mismatch.
It's a fit.
There's
Yes.
no lock and
Yeah.
key.
So although
Right.
you have one other, you're protected. I mean, obviously you have something else going on, but you're protected from malaria for that reason. It still can happen. If it happens, it is fatal because you have the sickle that aren't really very viable. They don't do much. They don't really carry oxygen very well. And it's called anemia for a reason. But when the healthy ones, if they burst, that's it. Person's gone. They can't survive it.
So a sickle cell person with sickle cell has both the round blood cells
Round
and the
and
sickle
sickle.
cell shape. So the malaria, it's like a
if it goes out, if it's able to get into some of the regular shaped ones, it can cause some serious damage. But usually what happens is you don't have enough for them to infect enough so that it matters. So
I see.
It's somewhat protective. But
It's
what
one
happens,
of the reasons why that mutation persists is because it is a protective, it's a natural protection against malaria. Would you agree,
yeah,
Kathy?
I would agree. Yeah, so it's like natural selection.
Yes.
Basically is what's happened. in because you see sickle traits in people of African descent, and then you'll see other types of traits in people of Mediterranean descent.
Yes.
But those are the thalassemias usually.
Yes.
Which actually I have a thalassemia and
Both?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
You're
I
a
found out in
medical
med school.
wonder.
I found out in medical school, someone was showing tests of how you can tell if someone has a sickle cell trait versus and what type of trait, A or B or B. And so I knew I had the trait. So I'm like, okay, well, test me, because then you can see if, use me as the control. So you'll be able to tell what someone else is. And when they tested it, the hematologist was like, are you sure you only have the trait? And I'm like, yeah. And he was like, are you sure? And I was like, I'm absolutely sure it's only the trait. So then he was like, hold on a minute. So then he brought something else out. And of course, right now I'm blanking as to which of is the lesser of the two thalassemias. I think it's B, not A, but I can't remember. Anyway, maybe you remember, Carmen.
I don't remember which one it is.
But so he tested for that, and he was like, oh. And he's like, that's really unusual, because usually it's found in people of Mediterranean descent. And I was like, well, my family was owned by Italian slave owners, so that makes sense.
Wow.
my mother's family were Mayos for that reason. So they were Italian. So that I was like, oh, so that's interesting. So it's
Italian, Cherokee,
I know.
African American.
I know.
Yeah.
But it's also
Awesome.
interesting why, many times in people of African descent, if they have anemia, even if it's just iron deficiency anemia, you have to treat it as if they have sickle cell traits. So you have to treat them with folic acid, B12, and vitamin C and iron, the way you would someone with sickle cell, even if they don't have the trait, just because of some genetic whatever anomaly or interest. But but what happens usually when someone is starting to go into that phase, they almost kind of go into a zombiness. Like it's like they start to slow down and they get this blank stare, and it's slow and slow and slow. And it's not like, oh, you're fine. And then all of a sudden it's like, I have malaria, I have a fever. It's like you watch the person just slowly start to slow down. And then it's like, you're like, what's wrong? Like almost like they're pushing through molasses, and it's like they stop being able to hear you. They stop being able to see. They get this blank look in their eye. And it's like, you can tell when they're starting to go into a malaria attack.
And how is malaria treated now? I mean, I'm guessing it's not rubbing goldberry.
No,
berry.
there's anti-malarial medications.
Okay.
There's preventative medications.
Mm-hmm.
And
There are
then
now.
and also some that you can take when you have it. They're different types of medications, but you can some, just like how with antivirals, if you take them as soon as you start having symptoms, they work a whole lot better, and they shorten the course. And then they take, and I'm blanking, it starts with a P, blanking on the name of the medication right now. Haven't treated it.
What creates an outbreak? Just like a
well, it sits in the liver, if I'm remembering correctly. It's like it lays dormant in the liver, and then all of a sudden it just kind of comes out and starts
like stress,
comes
or
out as
some, under stress.
There's no
or
rhyme or
like
reason
that.
to it.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think like anything, there's stress can do anything if you can, but there's no rhyme or reason.
And the liver has a huge blood supply.
Mm-hmm.
So when it can put out a lot of blood cells at the same time.
Yeah. The liver is actually part
it's
of
a hematopoietic organ.
Yeah. It's a lot of parasites love the liver. Flukes and lots of others.
It's
part of their life cycle.
Hematopoietic.
Hematopoietic.
Hematopoietic. It means that it can produce red cells.
Mm-hmm.
So bone marrow and the spleen and the lymph nodes are capable of it under some circumstances. Sometimes these happen in infants and fetuses and not in adults, but some of the variations. But we're very familiar with the bone marrow, but there's other hematopoietic organs that we have.
Yep. And sometimes they work for us and sometimes they work against us.
Yes, true.
And I didn't understand the whole rubbing the ointment on her.
She
Now there
had
are
no
something.
how is that pronounced? The cucina bar. She
Mhm.
had none.
Oh, to make us but that's more for the fever, isn't it?
Yeah, but so is the gallberry,
Was
isn't
it?
it? I thought it was.
Oh, I thought was it to cool her off, maybe. I didn't know what it was. Actually,
Well,
I
I
should have
think
looked that
that's,
up.
yeah. I think it
Kind
was
of
a
like
topical
eucalyptus
application.
or menthol or something. It kind of cools you
They're
when
bitter. I
Mhm.
don't know much. I'm not an herbologist, so I don't know
Yeah.
much about it.
Well,
But
they rubbed it again, as we learned.
obviously.
Everywhere.
they rubbed it on her. So I'd never heard of that.
They looked so
Yeah.
innocent in that scene.
Mhm.
I know.
Yeah,
It's in the
no.
book though. That's right
Yeah.
out of the book.
Oh yeah,
if you
no, I
remember.
know. I know. I just
Um,
it was fun watching it after seeing the whole, how it all comes out.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other part that was very interesting in that the Sin Eater, they definitely got the coloring right. But I would have thought the skin would have been I mean, it's like how long had he been dead? Because it's at some point he would have started getting mushy
I
and
think he was
liquidy.
close. You could hear the flies buzzing in
Yeah.
the tent.
Yeah.
Well, and it was making like a squishy sound when she was
Well,
cutting
and
him.
then when she was cutting, it just seemed like it seemed harder to cut than it would have been if he had been dead that long. He would have been just like,
Yeah,
But-
because the tissue softened.
Even the
Yeah.
bone?
No, she's cutting at joints.
Yeah.
She's not cutting. She
So it'd
wouldn't
be
be able
cut
to cut
through.
through the bone with that
Oh,
pocket
okay.
knife.
No, it would have been right at the. She would have
Did
been able
they
to
have
pull it. She
pocket
should have been
knives
able to
back
pull
then?
it apart. To
They
be
did.
honest.
I looked it up, and they had folding knives.
Oh, so you're saying she could have pulled that finger off, Catherine?
No, I'm saying she cut
No,
at
I
the
was
joint.
saying that at that point, if at a joint, you can, when someone's dead, you can pull it apart. I mean, there's some tendons in there, obviously, but they would have been mushy too.
Yeah, she might not have had to do it that hard,
Mhm.
because he was looking pretty ripe.
Yeah.
And she's right. It's the
Spoken
soft
like a true
tissues do
anatomist.
soften.
I just, is this really what I'm talking about? Like,
Yes.
Okay.
Um,
Antoinette.
the other was the use of marijuana for glaucoma. Is still very widely used now. The use of marijuana for anxiety, which is still very widely used now. Usually, it's often when you see someone who has to use marijuana often, and I say this for any addiction. If you see an addiction of any kind, which most people are not addicted to marijuana, you hear them addicted to other things, but usually it's someone self-medicating for something else. And depression, anxiety are very common in people who are marijuana smokers. And because it does kind of calm people down. Now, some people, like for me, it makes me paranoid. I was like, oh no, not for me. But then I also have the same reaction to anxiolytics. Everyone else takes Xanax and they're like, calm. I take something like that and I'm a benzodiazepine, I start climbing the walls. So I just
You
have
have a
the opposite
paradoxical response.
reaction. And so but so when she said, you give me this, gave it to Joe Costa for her glaucoma, was very realistic. And then also giving it to
Fiona.
Fiona. I always want to say Flora, but
It is Flora.
Oh, it is
It is
Flora.
Flora.
I'm
It's
sorry.
both.
See, I'm so bad with names.
No. We are accepting both because he called
Yes.
her Fiona.
Yeah.
I'm so
and
bad with
she's also
names. I never
Flora,
trust
so.
myself when I say a name. So, so the fact that she gave it to both of them was very realistic. Again, the medical part that I just like, that whole ether stuff just irks me because I'm like, well,
Yeah.
where did you take it? You just fell on the floor? I mean, what did you?
Well, when Waldemar saw it, he said, he turned to me and he said, I hope she's sitting down when she uses that.
Yeah. That's what I said. That's exactly what I said. I was like, okay, you're gonna end up with a gash on your head, but okay. Go right
Yeah.
ahead.
Just to comment about the marijuana, since I do live in a state where it's legal. It depends on what kind you get as
Yeah,
to
that's true.
the effect on you.
Mhm.
So I think it's called sativa, and
Mhm.
the other one is, but it's
Mhm.
also much
Yeah.
more potent now than it used to be. Because like
Yeah.
anything, just like with bread, they're like, let's take out all the stuff that comes with
And
it
so we
and
have
just
gluten.
have
Leave only the gluten.
just have white gluten, and then
Yeah.
everybody will become intolerant. And
Mhm.
so they've done that also with marijuana, which is unfortunate.
Mhm. Yeah.
But
Now
and I'm-
then, although hemp, where would hemp fall in that? Or is it all just generic? Like, is hemp just a generic name for all of it?
I think hemp is I mean, I'm not an expert, but I think it's
it
a
is too,
generic
but
name.
Okay.
But I will tell you, it's I don't know if you guys have ever bought marijuana, but in a legal place. But it's pretty interesting. You go in and it's you get a like a menu,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like a wine list basically, and it tells you, which they should do with wine.
Mm-hmm.
Like it should say, this wine is going to give you a hell of a hangover.
Mm-hmm.
They actually tell you that piece.
Yeah.
So it's like, this one's where they would say it's fruity and it's dry and all that stuff. They say it
Mhm.
has this effect.
well, I
Yeah.
will comment. I've got several. I will comment on a couple of things that I missed. I really missed Claire sticking a carpet needle in Jocasta's eye to relieve the glaucoma. In the book, it
I
does
miss
say
that
that
too. No.
that vitreous humor leaks out. It would be aqueous humor that
Mhm.
leaks out, not the vitreous. And then I also was sorry we didn't get to see the postmortem on Betty. I would have liked to have seen that autopsy that Claire performed in the book.
Yeah.
It's interesting that Mary is the stand-in for Phaedra, and her mother, Hannah, is apparently the stand-in for Betty, who was
Mhm.
Phaedra's mother. But then about the more specifically about the medical science and anatomy. Stephen Bonnet's bullocks are not normal for a male, for a human male. They're way too big.
Yeah.
They should measure about 4 by 3
Mhm.
by 2 centimeters.
They go just swole.
they-
They were just like engorged.
They were
because
very
of
swollen.
liquid.
Yeah. And then if you look closely at the lower pole, that's the lower half of it or so, it has these weird bumps on the surface of it, these
Mhm.
pale like mounds. I'm like, where in the world? I don't know what
They
you
look like
got in that
sheep. They
bottle.
look like they got them from sheep.
I think a sheep or a boar or something,
Yeah.
like that, but they're not human testicles.
Did
Mhm.
I
they
can tell you
say,
that.
they didn't
I
say in the
forgot about that.
podcast? Because I didn't listen to it. But
No,
Carmen, they didn't.
they did not address it in the podcast,
I'll have to
which
ask
is too bad.
Mike Gunn. Whose
What?
balls were those in the jar?
Whose balls were those?
Yeah, the production designer would know.
I will also, moving on, that's that's all I wanted to say about Stephen's balls. They
Bullocks,
were
yes.
not human.
He
I have
wasn't human.
dissected hundreds of them. They are not human.
Yeah, they
Okay.
did look awfully large.
He did have
Um,
big balls in life, though.
Well, he certainly acted like it for sure.
He's quite ballsy. Yeah.
I was going to echo what Kathy had said about hemp lowering interocular pressure,
Mhm.
which would help in glaucoma. But those studies didn't come out until the 1970s, and Claire left in 68.
Mm.
However, I thought, even though the publication wasn't out, it's probably out in the social,
Mhm.
the commentary of
Mhm.
amongst physicians of the time that
Yeah.
there is anecdotal evidence that this
Mhm.
might help.
Okay.
And so for that, I forgive that
Yeah.
small.
Well, then, and when you consider that a lot of these studies are studied because they've been patients
Because
keep saying,
somebody
I
has
do this and it
brought their
helps. I do this and
attention
it helps. And
yes.
then finally someone says, we should actually study that to see if they're
Yeah.
right.
I thought Roger isn't Jamie. He doesn't track Bree's courses. He had no idea that she might be pregnant. So he's no Jamie in that regard. In the tar scene, the guy throws this big splat, and the only place that it hits Jamie, sorry, is right here behind his ear, but none gets on his white stock or his coat or anything like that. I didn't think that was very convincing to me. Remember, he gets it all down the side of his face in the book. He actually, and she ends up taking away some of the skin with it. And they didn't use tar. It's my understanding they used pine pitch in those days. It wasn't the kind of tar like we think of as, it was called tar, but it wasn't like what we use on the roads. So it didn't get quite that as hot as my understanding. But I do have to say it's been a while since I've read about it.
So did he have 0 on his clothes?
0.
I didn't see any on his clothes at
Oh,
all.
that's
Yeah.
that's not
Yeah,
good.
I didn't think that was terribly convincing.
Yeah.
Why would Joe and Kezzy go to Bree to get the container for Lizzie when Lizzie is at the big house where all of Claire's supplies, her medical supplies would be? And I was scratching my head about that, why they would go there to her.
Or maybe they went
And
there to
get-
her to find out what to do, and she just gave it to them. She got it
Why would she have it?
because she knew she had to give it to them.
Yeah, maybe when she dropped Lizzie off at the big house,
She took it.
she took it.
Knowing
this is
that they're gonna
called
come.
Tori.
Well, because no, I mean, a good reasoning in her mind might be, if I try to tell them which thing to grab, they're not going to get the right thing. So I'm going to take it. So and tell Lizzie,
Okay.
have them come to me, and I'll tell them, give them the stuff and tell them what to do.
Okay, I could buy that. I do want to say something about perspective. The reason why I say that Stephen Bonnet's balls are too large sitting in that bottle is because if you look at the mouse next to it, it gives you an idea of the appropriate size. So in science, you look at anything that is around that you can use to compare it with. And then it can help you understand and describe what you're visualizing when you see something. And so that's just a little lesson there about science that I wanted to put out there. I really would have liked to have seen the needle with the eye. I think that could have been very dramatic.
Yeah.
And
just thinking about it, just like
yeah, I know.
That would have been cool, though.
Mhm.
Not sure how they would have pulled that off, but it would have been cool.
Oh, they would have used a prosthetic of some sort and done a close-up, so you really couldn't, you couldn't see that it was Maria. The man who gets shot in the arm, the blood that comes pouring out would be consistent with today's bullet. But those were balls that were being shot, and they really didn't produce that kind of, my understanding from what I've read is they really didn't produce that kind of wound. It more thrusts itself through the tissues, scorching them as they go through. And yes, there's blood, but that kind of dripping type blood is, I think, more consistent with
a bullet.
Today's weaponry rather than the weaponry of the 18th century. So that's
because wouldn't it have cauterized it, something in that?
Yes, it does. The
through?
ball's hot. What I read is as it comes out of the barrel of the gun, it's still hot, and it actually cauterizes the tissue as it passes through it. So
it would prevent bleeding altogether.
Yeah. If not altogether, certainly not as prolific as that. Yeah, right.
I mean, when you consider that you use something hot and burning to stop bleeding,
yes,
that would make sense that it wouldn't bleed that much.
Do you guys have any BTS? Go for it, Carmen.
Doesn't somebody else want to talk?
No.
And I saw the opening scene of them on the beach and they start heading out. I have been to the Isle of Skye and you can see it readily. It's very close. And I thought, that's not right. there it's not, you shouldn't see all of this sea out there and it takes them a long time to get there. Well, it turns out he was not on the mainland. He was on the Outer Hebrides, which is about 26 miles away. And so that was right. I learned something from that. I was really excited when I thought, oh my gosh, they got that right. They wouldn't have been able to see the Isle of Skye. There were 9 people on that boat. They didn't have that many, but in reality, and he was Betty Burke, like they said. And I realized that Flora had to play 2 ages in this, 30 years apart. So there she was as a young woman with the Bonnie Prince Charles, and then we see her 30 years later in the 1770s as a middle-aged woman, and I thought that was pretty cool.
How
I
old
thought
was she supposed to be in the 1770s?
I think she was about 9. Well, then I think she was about 19 when she helped Bonnie Prince Charles, either that or early 20s. She wasn't very old, so she would have been in her 50s or pretty close to it.
I thought she looked older than Claire.
Yes, but everybody looks older than
I know.
she's one of the most beautiful women that strides the earth.
I know, but it would make sense because Claire went back and she had face cream for 20 years. Yes. And this woman continued on in that time. So that's accurate. Yeah.
I thought that, did you pick up on Josiah Martin's Irish accent? And he was Irish in real life. So that was good that they found an actor and were consistent about that. I like it when they do that because it really shows their devotion to the story.
Barbara does her homework.
Yes. I also found that the reason why they switched the reception for Flora from River Run to Wilmington, in the book it's at River Run, in the show it's at Wilmington, was to tie into the Sons of Liberty, because that's where they were. And that's where they did a lot of their activity, was in Wilmington. And so that's why they placed the reception there and not at Jocasta's River Run.
Is that also why they switched the guy who was whistling?
Oh,
Donner.
Wendigo or
Wendigo, Donner. When they took him from being someone walking along the porch in the book versus being in the jail.
But I think he did end up in the jail in the book, didn't he?
He did, and I think they just condensed everything
into one. Okay, I don't remember.
So that he sold from Flora, and then he was apprehended for that and went to jail. That was a really creative and effective condensation of all those things.
All the things.
Yeah, in my opinion.
In the podcast, they said that the gazebo was built just for the women's club scene, that didn't exist before, and they built it just for that purpose. And that was so cool seeing them sitting there bonding with each other. I just thought that was great. The billiard table and the sticks are vintage. They did use, it was called, I believe, a mace. They pushed the balls, and there were only 3 in that game at the time. But I looked up billiards, and they originated in the 1300s as an outdoor game that was somewhat like croquet. And then Louis XI moved them indoors, and they made the table with a green top to mimic the grass that it originated on. So that's why they have traditionally green tops. And then the last thing I found out that was really interesting about that topic was that Mary Queen of Scots complained when she was in prison, they took away her billiards table. And after she was dead, they ended up covering her body with the green cloth that was on that table, which I thought was an interesting bit of history.
Yeah. somebody in the production told me that Barbara Stepansky was the writer on the ground. She was the one in Scotland during the pandemic. You know, they didn't,
Mhm.
the writers usually come over for their episodes, and they're there for, it's usually 2 weeks for one episode. Or yeah. And I don't think they came back and forth like that. I
Mm.
think Barbara was the liaison. And I understood she did a really, really great job. And
Wow.
Mhm.
That's a lot of responsibility.
it is. And I was just going to point out about the gazebo scene. I liked that they had Flora say, "We are a veritable gentleman's club," because they didn't have ladies, like, besides
Mhm.
knitting, you didn't sit around and drink and smoke pot.
Yeah.
So it was good that they put something like that in, so we weren't
Mhm.
like, oh, that didn't happen, you know. Okay, we're gonna skip lawyerly for now. Maybe Antoinette's gonna come in the last moment.
What is Lord John Grey's responsibility if he knows that Jamie's breaking the law?
Probably
Like, is there like an obligate, reporter? Like,
yeah, because he's committing treason, so he would have to, by law, especially as an officer in the
yeah.
military, I would think he would have to turn him in.
So if he also turned a blind eye and kind of warned him as to when they were going to show up at the inn so that they could help people get out, then
He's a co-conspirator.
Yeah,
exactly.
he's putting himself at risk.
But you know,
I'm
he's
sorry.
also a gay man at a time
Time when men.
that was some serious stuff.
Yeah, you know, I interviewed Jack Holden, and he was doing a one-man show in London. And anyway, it was about a guy who got AIDS in the 80s and everything that he went through. But he educated me about the Buggery Act of, I think it was from the 1500s,
Something like that.
was still being used. So, gosh, what was the guy's name that he just said they convicted him? He was like a scientist who made this huge contribution, and I'm not remembering the specifics right now, but he was then convicted under that Buggery Act in the 1900s, like I want to say in the 60s, 50s, 60s.
Where?
Oh,
What country?
in England.
In England.
What's his name? They did a movie about him. Is it The Imitation Game or something based on him? Turing.
Yes.
Oh,
Yes. He was
he did the
convicted.
Enigma.
Yeah,
He made the
yeah.
Enigma machine. Yeah.
Yeah.
He was
Yep.
convicted under the Buggery Act, which was
He
from
ended
the
up committing suicide.
1500s. Yeah, and his scientific contribution was in what, the 60s, the 50s.
It was World War II. So
It was World War II, so it'd been the 30s and 40s.
40s,
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think that Jack said that they only, and Antoinette could help us with this, but they only reversed that in like the 70s or something. Which is crazy.
A lot has happened since I've been born socially. A lot has happened socially.
Yeah.
In those intervening years, and it's really hard to believe what it was like when I was a girl. It was
I mean, when you consider
very
that
different.
in the United States, I mean, you think of Jim Crow, desegregation. I mean, Anthony started kindergarten in 1972. It was only in the second class of desegregated class in South Carolina. What is it, the miscegenation laws in Virginia? What was there? Love versus the Supreme Court, or
I don't know about that. But
basically, it was in the late 60s, early 70s. Up in some states, it was illegal for blacks and whites to marry.
That's right.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well,
so a lot of
these
these laws didn't change till the 70s. In fact,
Yeah.
up until the 80s, spousal rape was allowed until the 80s.
Wow.
I was
I've
in
told you
college when
guys
that was reversed.
I've told you guys I was bussed, right?
You were.
I don't think so. I don't remember you saying that.
In the 70s.
Yeah,
but
I remember people were bussed into the school I went to.
Yes.
And
yes.
because I lived in a predominantly white neighborhood, so
Right.
Black children were bussed in.
Black children were bused into our school for not kindergarten, first, third, fourth, and fifth.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the busing started, I don't think my oldest brother did busing. I think it started with my middle brother.
Didn't last, but it didn't, and it was a failed experiment,
Yeah.
because that's
It was
really
totally
all
a
it was.
failed experiment, because what they did was they create, and this is in Texas, they
Mm.
created a magnet program. And so we were all segregated within the school anyway.
Mm-hmm. And then charter schools started and private schools started, the flight schools.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's kind of like what you were saying about slavery, Catherine, is the same thing with the Lord John, them talking about treason and Lord John Gray being gay. It would be way different in
Mhm.
reality back then. I don't think he would.
Yeah, I think that the reason why I brought up that he was gay was because he already was compromised in terms of his uh, being honest with the military, which he
Mhm.
was a part of,
Yeah.
and his brother. And I don't know how many of his family members know that he's gay. I don't think William yet knows that he's gay. So he's hid that part of his life, but I think that might influence, I could see how that would influence his willingness to not rat on Jamie.
Mhm.
Hmm. Yeah, or just create any kind of a scandal.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and Jamie never told on him.
Yeah.
All the
Mhm.
way back to Ardsmuir, Jamie knew he was gay then, and he never revealed it at all. So it would really be pretty unseeming if Lord John would do that in return.
Well, I thought he did a good job of showing him grappling with it. Just,
Yeah.
and he always picks Jamie in the end. But let's go to favorite lines.
My favorite line in the entire episode is Jocasta saying, "In the boat." The way she said that was absolutely perfect. It was perfect. And it was said in, she was so unbelieving. And then I thought, but you did it in the shack with her.
Well, she also just seemed like she was stoned, and she was
Yeah,
laughing.
she was.
She was laughing like that
yes,
was
but it
a
was the way
stoner line and laugh.
that line was delivered. It was perfect to me.
Yeah. I liked the line. I know what it is to want to see that look on Claire's face. When you tell her that you're
Tell her
pregnant.
something. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I love that little scene, and I love that line, and just the way Marcelly delivered it, and the way that you could also see her worry for Henry Christian, her worry about their moving, all the things. Just Lauren played that so well.
When Claire was telling him that he had a crush on
Yes.
Oh,
Flora.
Tendras.
And
Yes.
how funny, because I actually thought of you because
Really?
it was his delivery
Yes.
when he goes,
but I can't remember
he
the
goes,
exact line.
a what? A what?
A what?
And it's,
and then he was like, no.
yeah.
He was
Didn't
like,
be daft.
Yeah.
But it was, when he said that, he truly looked like someone that was like,
What?
you're from another country speaking another language. A what?
Mhm.
And then she's like, a tendre or tendres.
Yeah. A tendresse.
Yeah.
He's like, no. It was the fact that he went from like, what, to incredulous. And I just thought that the acting in that was just really, really, really good.
I really liked Flora's statement, a man is more often judged by his actions and a woman more often by her appearance. And sadly, that is still true.
Yeah.
And, I thought she said it very well, but, she also said it in conjunction with praise for Claire as a woman physician and her stature, that she had done surgery in the foyer of the theater, and people were still talking about it. But I just thought that was a really good reminder to all of us about that, because I just feel sometimes that our young girls are just lost by being overwhelmed with what they're supposed to look like, more so than what going on inside their head or their heart, and that bothers me a lot.
I I have a young girl, and what I see is they're getting conflicting messages.
Mm-hmm.
They're getting the message that they matter, that they're, you know, that it's not all about what they look like, but then there's also something about, I want to be a girl, I want to be feminine. And
Mm-hmm.
then there's the piece of all the TikTok and all the people who have this, exact certain look, and they get all these
Mm-hmm.
likes. And so it's all there, it's all swirling around. Like if they didn't have the updated messages about, you know, um, standing up for women, and, I see my daughter saying like, well, I want to support her because she's a woman, even if I disagree with her,
Mm-hmm.
things like that. And I'm like, that's cool. If they didn't have that to go along with all the other stuff, I'd be super worried.
Yeah. The thing that worries me is apart from the being girls, in general, this generation doesn't know what it feels like to be exceptional in their space, because there's always some image, some audio, something that shows someone who's at the top of the bell curve. And so at comparison, it makes them feel
It's true.
inadequate.
Yeah.
I grew up at a time where I thought I was a really good singer. I was really good at musician. I was good at acting. I was good at sports. I was good at other things. If I had the internet, it would have just knocked all that out of me, because I was like, I'm
Yeah.
not as good as she is.
Yeah.
I'm not, I can't sing like that at 5 years
Yeah.
old. I'm not an opera singer at, 10. I'm not, it's like everything that they do now is they can't shine on their own, because there's always some image or something of somebody who's
Superior.
otherworldly,
Yeah.
but then they just like, oh well, I'm not as good.
I see that. I also see the flip side of um, seeing those people as someone to aspire to.
If they're the same age and they're older, but when you see a 5-year-old doing it, it's like, you play the piano, they don't know that maybe the person is autistic, and it's like they're a savant.
Yeah.
They don't know that, they just see this 5-year-old playing, Chopin, and they don't know. I mean, I watched it with my daughters, and which is why we just limited their internet access. And which is interesting, now they don't post anything. And I was like, how am I supposed to spy on you if you don't post the stuff that you're doing? They're like, we just tell you. We don't have to.
They're probably smart not to post much
They
of their
don't.
life
Yeah.
on social
They
media.
don't.
Last time I laid eyes on you, you kicked me in the shin. I, Fiona Gold, but you stole my bridie and pulled my hair. I thought that was a
Good.
cute exchange.
And they said it well. The
Yeah.
exchange was very well done.
Yeah.
Well, I had another one that got me, and that's when Lord John said, "It is inconceivable and incomprehensible that the colonies should govern themselves." But you know what came to my mind is The Princess Bride.
Inconceivable.
Right. I just couldn't get that out of my mind when I heard that line. I
It
like
just makes you wonder. As
What?
you watch change, and you just don't know which side of the scale it's going to fall. And you don't know what's the beginning of the tipping point.
What are you referring to now?
Just in
Kathy?
history, it's like you don't know if something's going to be a wave and then it's just going to recede,
Yeah, it's only looking
or
back.
if it's a
that
wave
you-
and then it's going to keep going, and it's just watching, listening to those lines,
Yeah.
watching the history. For
Yeah.
every single revolution that was successful, there were probably 2 that were squashed,
At least.
Yeah.
and so it's just interesting to see, to hear, just to recognize the history behind what happened, how incredulous it has been. With all its problems, it's still pretty amazing.
Well, yeah. And I mean, everything is like that. There's probably, you can find people saying women will never vote and this will never, all those things.
Yeah. The progression of self-determination of an individual is sort of a natural growth of society, as opposed to a natural growth of government. That's a little different, because it's more political than personal. And so the reason, like, I'm sure there were many monarchies around Europe who never in a million years thought that they would no longer exist at some point.
Right. Yeah.
That type of thing.
I see what you're saying. The British Empire.
It's only one of like what, 3 that have been, well, in Europe there's only like 3 or 4, like the British, Swedish, and there's one, Luxembourg, that still have a monarch, monarchy in Europe.
Spain still does, I think.
Oh, that's right,
Denmark.
Spain.
Yeah.
Doesn't Denmark still have a royal family?
Still sitting monarchs. There's
see.
not very many compared to where every single country was a monarchy before, and now there's only, a handful.
Yeah, it's definitely a dated model.
Indeed it is.
Okay, let's go to standouts.
I will repeat that the good solid writing in this episode I felt was a standout. Shauna McDonald did a great job as Flora, even though her part didn't occupy that much of the story. I thought that she was very convincing in that part. And then I just love Maria as Aunt Jo. She just owns that role. And the delivery of her lines they're just fabulous. And I can't find a flaw in her performance as Jo. And Jo Casta is not an easy woman, I don't think, to portray, because she's paradoxical. She's got some really great things about her, and then there are some things that really are not very admirable. And Jamie keeps saying that the Mackenzies are like the larks in the field, but they're very personable like the larks in the field, but they're sly like the foxes they're in too. So he's always on the lookout. He knows Jocasta has a reason for buying that print shop, for instance. And so she's a complicated woman, but I think Maria does a great job portraying her.
She does a great job of holding all those paradoxes that are Jocasta and letting them all show up in one way or another. That I really enjoyed the interplay between she and Jamie in this episode, where he knows what she's up to, and then she kind of says, well, do you begrudge him his happiness? And then he's like, no, but and he knows, but she does strike a chord in him. He does think, well, yeah, that's true, but so it's not all black or white. It's mixed.
Shades
and she
of
does
gray.
Shades of gray, and she does a great job with that, and he did a great job with that. That's another thing that was captured in this episode of the storylines and the I agree. She was on my list too. Carmen, I had Sam and what's the woman who played Flora?
Shauna McDonald.
Shauna McDonald as Flora, and then I had Maria Doyle Kennedy and the woman who played Mary. Those were my standouts.
I had her too.
Yeah.
Now, do you know how to pronounce her name by any chance?
I
How's it
didn't.
spelled?
Well, Mercy is her first name, but it's Ojelade. Would the J be pronounced?
Is it a Nigerian name?
I don't know.
Ojelade.
Ojelade. Okay.
I just wanted to add in Barbara Stepanski into my standouts, and the Gregor, whatever his name is, who sang the opening. Yeah.
My standout's always when she's in anything, she stands out.
That's true.
Always, every time.
Yeah.
My other standout is Sam, as the music, the sets, the costumes. I mean, it's just because there were so many different components to the costume, because you had the Bonnie Prince costumes, then you
Mhm.
had the modern costume, well, modern for the show.
Yeah.
And then you had the, the Sons of Liberty costumes, and you had the upper crust of society costumes. It was just, and then you had the Ridge costumes. It was just so well, and you could see the distinction between each of them. It wasn't like they were, there was any blending. The other thing that stood out for me was that there was so much information and it all worked. It could have easily felt rushed and disjointed, but it didn't.
Yeah.
It was just very entertaining. Often when I watch something more than once, I will skip over some things or I'll kind of zone out, and I never zoned out.
I do think that the extra 15 minutes was really well served in this episode. And it is something that I'm hopeful that they will do more when they have an episode that has so much in it that that a little bit more time can be used to help the audience really understand all the different parts to the story. And I thought that worked well for them in this.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm guessing that they had to have found out that they had extra time after the fact. So they were able to keep more material in post-production. So that just leads you to the conclusion that in the regular 60-minute episodes, they just have to chop out so much, which they have to chop out too much.
Yes, they do.
Once we see
yeah.
the contrast of this season, they're chopping out too much. So Stars really needs to give them more time for these episodes.
I agree.
Yep.
Because the film I'm sure that the stuff has been filmed.
Yes.
They have the footage. It isn't that they have to go back and try to create something, because I hear them over and over say that they've got a lot more content than what they're able to present.
Right.
Wow, there's a lot of themes in this. Like we said, a lot of moving parts in this particular episode, but I'd say the overarching theme for me is that Jamie chooses and declares that he will stand with the birth of a new nation. And I think that's really critical for the story moving forward. And that would be the major theme that I see in this episode.
My big theme is the more things change, the more they stay the same.
Good.
Yeah.
And I think, in fact, that always stands out to me, because I think there was early on in my following of Outlander, Diana wrote that as a response to someone. And all I could remember is the last part of it is quelque chose.
My big theme for this season, and it's even more obvious as the episodes go on, is kind of you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't.
No good deed will go unpunished.
Yeah, I think that was Catherine's theme for 608. Yeah, because Jamie's really stuck in a hard position, and that same Roger's trying to help Amy, and then he's the town slut, and then
Claire.
Yeah, Claire, we really see that coming up.
Yep.
But and even Lord John Grey, like he's stuck also. He loves his friend, but he has his, his convictions, and it's just this episode did a good job of checking all the boxes. It really did move the story forward, but it did such a good job of showing all the conflict, all the conflicting forces coming together and stirring around each other. And
within families too. You think of Joe Cast, I mean, she is a loyalist.
Mhm.
And here she is against Jamie, who is not. And
No, not
then his son, now she has taken his son, his adopted son and foster son, and put him in a situation where now he's beholden to her.
Well,
And that's an interesting twist, because she doesn't buy him that in the book.
yeah, I think it's a good vehicle, and I
Mhm.
liked how they brought in our memory. I'm actually surprised they didn't show that in the previously
Mhm.
of her losing her daughter. What these risings have cost her, literally all her
Mhm.
family, and
Yeah.
why she's unwilling to do it again.
Yeah.
Well, I think Jamie says something about that in this episode, that
Yeah.
they,
Mhm.
why
They
there
lost
are
so much.
loyalists amongst the Scottish,
Mhm.
Yeah.
because they lost everything
Yeah.
and they don't want to do it again.
Yeah, and they've found a new life, they've found peace. And he also acknowledges, I understand your grief. And I think he's talking about Myrta and the loss of her daughter. He's talking about all of it.
Yes.
And that's what this episode did such a good job of, grabbing all those threads and pulling them into the scenes.
Plus ça change, plus c'est la même chose.
Okay.
The more
Stand for-
things change, the more they stay the same.
Yeah.
So
Well, we certainly see that all around us. And I'm sure
Yes.
that they took this opportunity to really go there, to make that sort of statement, social
Mhm.
statement.
Yeah, I think this whole season I have seen parallels
Mhm.
Yeah.
multiple times between what we're struggling with now as a nation,
Yeah.
and what was happening both locally on the ridge and
Mhm.
more globally in
Yeah.
the East Coast. So
Yeah.
Yeah. And when you dig into little different parts of history, you see this.
Yeah. One of the things I'm really looking forward to, and I loved it with the way Diana tied them into the book, wove them into the books, were all these historical figures. I'm just looking forward to, especially now, because I think Hamilton was in the book, wasn't he? At some point. I know Washington
George
was.
Washington was, and
Benedict Arnold.
Benedict
Benedict Arnold.
was Jefferson.
I
Ben
don't remember
Franklin.
Jefferson, but I know Ben Franklin was.
I hope they keep him.
Was Hamilton in there?
I don't remember.
I thought
that
he
one.
was.
I think maybe he was mentioned in Moby.
Because
he
was Washington's secretary, so he had to have been with him at some point.
Yeah, that'll be fun. And of course, you guys know that William's been cast.
Yes.
And
I think he looks like Sam to me.
I can see like how they're going to make
him look like
I think he
Sam.
looks like a combination of Sam and
his mother.
Gwen.
But I could see how
what's her name?
His
Hannah.
headshot may not look exactly like him, but I can see how they could easily have him look like Sam with the right hair, hair color.
Yeah. I don't know if you guys saw the little piece I did on him, but I did a little bit of research, and he's a very nice young man. And I think he has a lot of both Sam and Jamie and Geneva.
Thank you. That's who I was thinking of, Gwen.
And I was trying to think.
I was bad with names. Wow.
No, I'm not very good with names, unless they're scientific names, and then they're fine. Yeah. Well, I'm going to get some food.
Yeah, me too.
Me too.
I'm hungry.
Me too.
I
love you
like
guys.
All right. Well, we missed Antoinette.
We did.
It still took us 3 hours.
And she's still not here.
We're amazing.
Must be quite a situation. We got it done, though. We got every single episode in season 6.
Yeah.
Bye, gals.
Bye, guys.
Love you.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye. Love you guys. Bye.
Bye. Love you too.